In the prosecutor's office, the law comes first, but here it's the person who comes first. Either the human rights situation in Kazakhstan is getting worse or people are starting to trust the institution more. Yes, we'll see an increase for a while, and I've been saying that from the start. In torture cases, what matters most? Timely documentation of injuries and consistent testimony. Why is your personal presence necessary there? If you save even one life, then your work hasn't been in vain. Did you have to change your perspective? Bring us the facts and let's work on them. We need criticism. Since January 1st, 2023, Artur Lastaev has served as the Commissioner for Human Rights in the Republic of Kazakhstan. Before that, he worked in the prosecutor's office, starting as an assistant district prosecutor in Almaty. In recent years, he represented Kazakhstan's General Prosecutor's office in Europe and led its Department of International Legal Cooperation. His appointment as Ombudsman came at a pivotal time when a new constitutional law significantly expanded the role of the Human Rights Commissioner in our country. Artur, good afternoon. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us. We're here in the heart of Astana at the office of the Human Rights Commissioner. Tell me, is this where you meet with people who want to speak with you in person? Yes, this is exactly where we hold personal meetings with citizens. Our office is just behind me here. And when we visit closed or specialized institutions, we also meet with people there in person. How many people actually want to meet with you face to face? So far, I've met with around 60 people, give or take. Tomorrow we're heading to a women's correctional facility. I've been told about 20 women there have also requested to meet with me. But the work of the Ombudsman isn't just about individual cases. It also involves systemic efforts to improve legislation. Do these personal meetings help shape that part of your work? Absolutely. Individual cases are at the core of our work. It's through them that we build a broader picture, which we then analyze. That helps us determine whether there's a systemic issue at play, and if so, whether it stems from shortcomings in legislation or from how the laws are being applied. It's a fascinating area of work, really. Today, let's take a closer look at what this role actually involves, the challenges the Human Rights Ombudsman in Kazakhstan is currently facing, and perhaps most importantly, the influence and authority that Artur Lastaev holds in this position. Of course, welcome. Let's go inside. You mentioned earlier that the number of appeals to the Human Rights Commissioner has grown significantly. What do you think is behind this trend? Is it a sign that the human rights situation in Kazakhstan is getting worse? Or is it more about growing public trust in your institution? I imagine people reach out for all sorts of reasons. Often they're unhappy with court decisions, and I know cases where they don't just appeal through official channels, but also write to you directly, hoping you can somehow intervene. In that context, how much influence do you really have? Obviously, the Human Rights Commissioner can't overturn court rulings or punish people you believe are at fault. But do the courts, the prosecutor's office, or law enforcement actually take your feedback seriously? By law, we've been removed from the procedural side of things. We don't have the authority to intervene directly in legal proceedings. Even if we do identify a potential issue, something that often comes up during in-person meetings with citizens, we'll usually say, bring your lawyer, and we'll share our perspective with them. That advisory role is one of the key responsibilities of a Human Rights Commissioner. Sometimes we'll send our opinion to the General Prosecutor's office and recommend they consider filing a protest, especially in criminal cases where we believe there's been an injustice. But let me ask you, when you send a recommendation to the General Prosecutor's office to file a protest in a criminal case that's already been ruled on, even at the first instance level, do they actually listen to you? It varies. There have been cases where they filed a protest and the protest was upheld. Other times the protest was filed but rejected. And sometimes they decide our arguments aren't strong enough or won't be convincing enough for the court. Just like us, they make a preliminary assessment. Is there a high chance of success or just 50-50? But even in cases where the chances are only about 50%, we still submit our petition. So, based on what you're saying, these examples and statistics, it sounds like the prosecutor's office doesn't treat your suggestions as a formality. They actually look into the cases and act accordingly. They do, and we try not to overuse that channel. Let's talk about your role in shaping legislation. Over the past 2 years since you've taken office, quite a few important laws have been passed, particularly ones focused on human rights and fundamental issues like safety. Domestic violence, for example. Exactly, domestic violence, bullying. Now, lawmakers are pushing for legislation on stalking, something that hasn't really been addressed in our legal system before. How much of your work is devoted to this kind of legislative input, especially considering how crucial it is? And what role do you see yourself playing in that process? Let me give you an example related to domestic violence, how it all started and where things stand today, even with the new law now in place. Back in mid-2023, we began a deep dive into the issue. We put together a comprehensive briefing paper, which we sent to relevant government agencies. They gave us their feedback. We revised the paper based on what some ministries considered underdeveloped ideas. Then, we organized an international conference and invited partners from countries that are considered to be more advanced in tackling domestic violence. After that, we quite literally brought everyone to the same table, Kazakhstani human rights advocates who specialize in domestic violence. Interestingly, not all of them accepted the invitation, but those who did had a unique opportunity to sit down with representatives of government agencies. And we were very intentional about this. We made sure the people attending from ministries were the ones actually shaping policy. So, were there senior officials? No. Then who was? Experts, mid-level specialists and below. That was intentional. We invited senior officials to the conference later and we said, look, these are the discussions that happened. These are the conclusions that were reached. From that process and those empirical data, we drafted a special report on domestic violence. It's available on our website. I don't quite recall whether Parliament formally requested it or if we submitted it on our own initiative, but we shared all our legislative recommendations. And a significant portion of our proposals made it into the amendments that were passed in April last year. Let me stress, this is just one example. Last year, there was some pushback from certain voices in the human rights community. They claimed the law was designed to criminalize parents and remove children from families. We couldn't ignore that. We launched an entire public awareness campaign to explain what the law really aimed to do. We had to put so much work into this, our office included, that staying silent wasn't an option. In July last year, if I'm remembering correctly, the law went into effect. Since then, we've been monitoring its impact. Now, ideally, and experts will understand this, you'd want 2 or 3 years before evaluating such a law. But we didn't wait. We've been analyzing its effectiveness almost monthly. And we're already seeing results. For example, murders related to domestic violence have dropped by nearly 15%.
Причинение тяжкого вреда здоровью
Serious bodily injuries are down 40%. Moderate injuries are decreasing as well, another 15% reduction. Let's put that into perspective.
обычно. Я понимаю, цифры иногда сложно воспринять.
I know statistics can feel abstract, but a 15% drop means at least 20 lives were saved in just 1 year.
Тут, когда ты одну жизнь спас, считается, что не зря работал.
And saving even one life means the work was worth it. We'll keep monitoring the law to see whether the amendments went far enough, or if some of them weren't effective. This is meticulous, ongoing work. It starts with reviewing complaints, say someone reports domestic violence. We look into it and check for patterns or systemic failures. And then it goes all the way up to our analysts who specialize in legislation, including our international legal team. Again, we come back to analysis, this time focused on law enforcement and the way legal norms are actually applied. How is the criminal justice system functioning? For instance, the recent criminalization of beatings and minor injuries. How is it working in practice? And is there a connection between the most extreme form of domestic violence, murder, and the criminalization of lesser offenses, like beatings or minor injuries?
Криминализация легкого вреда или побоев.
Well, based on the drop in serious crimes, there clearly is a connection.
Какая связь?
It clearly shows there is a connection. But what kind of connection? What's the percentage? I've just mentioned that. When you speak with solid arguments, when your proposals are thoughtful and based on actual data, that's when your words carry weight.
Тогда и вес вот к вашему.
And to return to your early question, that's when our submissions are taken seriously. If you send in half a page saying, "This is what I think, please act on it," people might respond politely, but they're unlikely to take it seriously. But if you present real statistics, if you point out exactly where the system is failing, then the conversation changes. How did we convince the state that domestic violence needed to be criminalized?
На что я опирался?
By showing the statistics. Exactly. Even during the previous criminalization attempt between 2015 and 2017, which wasn't perfectly implemented, we still saw a noticeable drop in murders. So we shouldn't dramatize. Yes, violations in this area are increasing, but we have to consider the cultural and mental factors too. I think the increase is mostly due to more people reporting abuse. In the past, this kind of thing was kept behind closed doors. Absolutely right.
Ведь органы, в первую очередь полиция.
First of all, there's the cultural and mental aspect. And second, law enforcement, especially the police, have been reoriented from a reactive model to a proactive one.
Классическую ситуацию, там супруга говорит: "Нет, я ничего писать не буду", ну.
That means even in a classic scenario where the wife says, "No, I'm not going to file a complaint," but neighbors or even the child, who, by the way, is a passive victim of domestic violence, report the incident, the police still document it and submit it for judicial review regardless of whether the spouse presses charges. So yes, for a while we will see an increase in numbers. I've said this from the start. We expected this rise last year, we're seeing it now, and we anticipated it. The statistics will continue to climb until they reflect the actual situation on the ground. We're bringing this hidden, latent sphere out of the shadows. And secondly, the murders won't stabilize until repeat abusers understand that punishment is inevitable and that they must change their behavior. That's one of the most effective and rational ways to build a society free from violence.
Построение общества, свободного от насилия.
So, Artur, we're now leaving your office in the center of Astana and heading to a closed institution. What exactly do you do there? And why is it important to you personally? After all, Kazakhstan has had a fairly effective national preventive mechanism in place for some time now. They already have the authority to make unannounced visits and document any violations. Why is your personal presence necessary?
Я вам больше того скажу.
I'll go even further. On top of the NPM, we also have regional representatives of the Human Rights Commissioner, and they're empowered with the same authority as the NPM.
Это первое. Второе, я сам, я считаю.
But for me personally, I believe it's essential to visit these institutions myself and see what's really happening on the ground.
Там, в данном случае у меня
I also have specific concerns I pay close attention to.
особое внимание.
Like what? When you say specific concerns, that immediately makes me want to ask, what kind of concerns?
В этом году была передача.
Well, in 2023, responsibility for prison healthcare was officially transferred from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, basically from the police, to the Ministry of Health.
Вот,
As you can imagine, that kind of transition doesn't happen overnight. We need to understand what challenges exist, including objective ones, and see how we can help. Our aim isn't to criticize the Ministry of Health, it's the opposite. We want to support them. What kind of challenges are we talking about? Lack of medical equipment, staff shortages?
и другое, где-то не
Both. In some places there's a shortage of staff. For example, we visited a facility where inmates are serving life sentences. Last year, they were struggling to attract medical personnel, mainly because the facility isn't located within the city limits. Right. So if you're earning the same salary working in the city as you would in a remote location, that takes an hour and a half or even 2 hours to reach. It's no surprise that not many people are willing to take that job. Exactly, and that's true across the board. But you said they had a problem. Does that mean it's been solved?
Я не хотел бы.
I don't want to give away all my secrets, but we're looking into it.
Проанализируем, решилась она.
Right now, the big question is whether the transition is working effectively. And yes, we're seeing some positive outcomes. Take the issues we saw in 2023, for example. Doctors examining a patient. In their eyes, these aren't inmates, they're patients. Would record everything manually, by hand, in the relevant medical documentation. Then they'd return to their regular clinics and re-enter everything into the system manually. That's not how it should work. But this year, I've seen that problem being addressed, and we've responded accordingly.
Эта проблема уже была решена. Мы поэтому,
Why is that an issue?
когда ты вводишь соответствующие данные, связанные в том числе
Because when a doctor records something, especially if it relates to signs of torture or bodily injury, that data should immediately be entered into the digital system. That way, the relevant authorities are alerted in real time.
в том числе и компетентные органы.
So by doing it manually, we're losing time.
По делам о пытках,
Of course.
как-то уже говорил в некоторых интервью своих, по делам о пытках.
When it comes to cases involving torture, as I've mentioned in some of my previous interviews, what's crucial is timely documentation of injuries and consistent statements. The victim must be able to identify those who tortured them. Everything else is a matter of procedure, something competent authorities with the proper experience can handle and bring to court.
Направить уголовное дело в суд. Почему это важно?
Why is this so important? Because even though we're not a law enforcement body, the inevitability of punishment for torture is one of the most effective tools in preventing it from happening again. That's the essence of prevention.
Недопущение. В этом и превенция.
The measures can only be considered truly effective when, not just for 1 year, but for several consecutive years, we see 0 cases of torture. Do you think that's actually achievable? I really want to believe it is. Why? Because I think the conditions for a serious reduction have already been created.
Того, чтобы серьезно снизить.
Now the question is, how long will it take for the law to fully take effect, for everyone to understand it on the ground, including the average officer working in a specific institution? That takes time.
Включая рядового офицера на местах.
We're closely monitoring the situation, and I'll be honest, we've dedicated significant resources to this.
Я, наверное,
First, to properly analyze it, and second, we go out there ourselves and talk to people. We visit prisons, detention centers, we speak with inmates, and we speak with the administration.
разговариваем.
I walk in and say, show me how the surveillance cameras work, show me how the reporting terminals work, and the truth is, not all cameras are functioning, not all terminals are operational, but we're not stopping. We'll keep going and keep issuing recommendations, and yes, I criticize. That's what criticism is. It's informed, it's documented, it's based on facts.
Она
And that's why we need it. I'm not saying things should be swept under the rug. Bring us concrete facts and we'll work with them. We won't just confirm that a problem exists. We'll dig into root causes and the conditions that allowed it to happen. And then you'll figure out how to fix it. Of course. We have a strong team of analysts, experts and highly specialized professionals, talented people who are truly dedicated to their work as human rights defenders. They help me tremendously, of course. What kind of backgrounds do they have? You, for instance, are well known for your career in the prosecutor's office. But what about today's human rights defenders working in your office? What kind of experience do they have? Very diverse. Some of them came from specialized ministries like the Ministry of Justice, so they're mostly lawyers, from the Ministry of Labor, so from the social sector as well. If we're talking, for example, about the Department for International Cooperation, there's one set of requirements. But in the division that deals with protecting human rights in criminal proceedings, naturally, we prioritize people with a different kind of background. I'm curious, what kind of background do they need there? Are they from law enforcement? Not necessarily. Because, you know, people who spend years in the system often carry some of that system with them. Can they really be effective as human rights defenders? That's what I'm wondering. What do you mean they carry the system with them? I mean emotionally, mentally. So you're saying they can't be human rights defenders? That's discrimination, wouldn't you agree? I'm just exploring the idea. I'm asking how it plays out in practice. Look, someone who's worked inside the penitentiary system knows how everything functions from the inside. The real question is, are they committed to this new mission as a human rights defender? Can they now solve the kinds of problems they couldn't address while they were still working in the system? If someone isn't genuinely committed to this profession, then we'll part ways with them. You came into the role of Human Rights Commissioner after a long career in the prosecutor's office. That's been your entire professional life, working within a supervisory institution. Did you have to shift your perspective at all? Maybe change the principles you work by. After all, now you're outside the system, and in some cases, you're pointing out human rights violations committed by the very system you once served. We do that actively, yes. And you're right, I've definitely had to shift my point of view. In the prosecutor's office, the law is your starting point. You interpret it and apply it to the person or the institution. But in this role, you start with the person. It's a human-centered model for managing issues. Was that a difficult transition for you? At first, yes. But let me explain. Here, the law is meant to serve the person. And if the law falls short, which frankly happens often, then we turn to international standards. That's a fascinating process. And it's still a legal process, by the way. So in terms of legal foundation, my approach hasn't changed that much. What's changed is the toolkit. If national legislation isn't enough to protect someone's rights in a specific case or to defend the rights of a broader group, we then look at international treaties that Kazakhstan has ratified. We also look at how those treaties are interpreted by the relevant treaty bodies. Most often, we turn to the UN Human Rights Committee. We study how they've interpreted state policies in cases similar to ours, whether here or in other countries. Did the state have the right to restrict that particular right, or should it have acted differently? It's a whole world unto itself, and it's incredibly interesting, and we also refer to case law. I'm curious, does your background, your network from your time in the prosecutor's office help you in this new role? Honestly, I wouldn't say I rely on those connections, nor is there really any need to. I've built new relationships in this role. As for the General Prosecutor's Office, it's a system. a system that depends on individuals.
В наименьшей степени. И так и, наверное,
Very little, and that's how it should be.
фундаментальные постулаты.
There are certain fundamental principles that govern how the system operates. It doesn't matter where I work now. What matters is how convincingly I present my case. If you write a well-argued proposal, lay out your reasoning, and explain why the issue matters, they'll review it.
Она будет рассматривать.